Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I am Lauren LeRoy with BigID, and we are partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT, CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Dr. Santha Ramakrishnan, Global Data Governance Lead at Sanofi, about the priorities foundation to build a data governance program. First of all, hello, Santha. I'd like to give you a moment to say hello and introduce yourself and a little bit about what Sanofi does.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you to the CDO Magazine for having me on. It's truly a pleasure here to be sharing with you and to the audience that comes to you, a big, wide audience I know from the world, sharing our experiences and seeing how we can make this world of data a better place to be in. So with that, Sanofi is a pharmaceutical company, and I have a background in the life sciences. I have a PhD in biochemistry, and over my time have moved from doing different parts of data within the pharmaceutical R&D continuum, from building products to building operations, and now helping build the data office at Sanofi. That has been my experience, but I bring to it the depth of science, which so I'm putting my PhD to good use here by bringing the science to the data in how we define the data strategy and bring data to the people at Sanofi. That is a little bit about myself and what I do and what Sanofi does.
I love that. I love that you have both a combination of the context of you have both your background in the science as well as your data background. So for context, I think it's a great start. So in that world, as the global data governance lead, what are your priorities for building a data-driven culture? And how does that align with the Sanofi's business objectives?
So all pharma are engaged in the business of course, making medicines. And all pharma in the process of making medicines and getting them to their patients, generate and use a lot of data. And that data is generated at different parts. Typically, there are big things in pharma called R&D, commercial. Those are the big buckets, if you will. And R&D, pharmaceutical R&D data in itself is very niche and very different than what you would find in, say, a retail organization or anywhere else. There are multiple kinds of data with multiple nuances. The depth of the domain, of course, is one you can imagine or cannot imagine probably, and that is what makes pharmaceutical R&D a very interesting place to be. And in addition to the data and the complexity, or what we call the volume and the veracity of the data, the data folks typically know data by. There is also the challenge of, let us say, privacy, because at the end of the day, these are data, a large part of this data is generated from patients and therefore we have to respect their privacy and also use it in an ethically responsible manner. And that is what makes this challenge of governance a very interesting puzzle and something to work with in a nice manner, to make it streamlined, to make it smooth, to make it, of course, ethical and compliant when reusing data. We generate gobs and gobs of data, every pharma does. And generating value out of this data is really the mission of governance. And the best way to get value out of data is to see that all people within the pharma, or maybe even collaborators outside, can access the data in a seamless, transparent manner, can work with it ethically, responsibly, and generate all kinds of insights that they want to. So in the mission of the governance activities that we do is really the mission of generating value. How best can you do this? And that in itself, that is really the mission of governance at Sanofi.
I think that's excellent. That's a really great point too, for people to realize that because you're working in a pharmaceutical, of course, you think you're creating, pharma products, but then realizing that all of that is based on the data from actual people, and that could definitely get into the world of privacy and making sure that all your data is being ethically used, as you said. I guess a great point. And so you've also worked with different healthcare companies, right? And so what specific benefits has the digital transformation in life sciences gained? So having all of these different products, the different technologies, how are you able to adapt those technologies for the benefits that you're trying to achieve?
So so I think pharma industry, just like anyone else, has to take advantage of the leaps in technology from being on premise to being on the cloud, for instance. That in itself is a huge transformation. Then there are other digital transformations that enable R&D business processes to work that much faster than they used to do before. It's no more manual, it's more digital, right? How can I enable any given process digitally? So what every industry sees is what we see in pharma too. But again, adapting those technologies to the R&D, and I'm saying R&D because that's where all the fun is, very different than other industries where the specialization is. But we learn a lot. We have to put it to use within R&D, which has its own challenges because they are, I mean, I cannot underscore the word niche enough, but they are very niche. And one function may have a slightly different way of doing it than this. We all make molecules, but within that scope of making molecules, what kind of molecule are we making? Are we making a simple Tylenol-like molecule, or are we making the COVID vaccine? All of those argue for very different business processes, therefore very different data that they generate, those business processes, or the data that people have to work with. And those nuances and those differences are what make the practice of digitization or the digital transformation a very hard one to accomplish so easily. It's not as simple as putting your next app on your iPhone or on your tablet from your things, not just like bringing airlines to your phone. It's much more nuanced, much more challenging, and at the same time, much more interesting. So every pharma is making huge strides in digital transformation. I mean, what COVID taught us, for example, was how can I run the lab from sitting at home, right? How do I digitally enable, how can that digital transformation allow for remote access into the lab to the best you can? How can all the instruments within a lab connect and talk to each other on a digitally enabled platform? So those are many things that we are attempting. So what does it mean? How are we adapting to it? How are we adapting to it? First, at the core, we know that all digital requires data. There is no digital without data. I mean, or digital generates different data. So you have to think about the underlying data. It's just not about creating yet another platform or yet another dashboard to find some new ways of working. But unless the data that is underneath of these so-called front faces, or the data that powers and runs through all of these business processes are in some good manner usable, all of the digital transformation will probably come to naught, as they would say. So we in the data office are making sure that the data is available for that digital transformation. And and it's a lot of work to do. What does it mean? It is what everyone in the data industry knows very well, the concept of FAIR. Findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, but with quality. You also need good quality data. FAIR alone doesn't make everything quality, but the FAIR plus Q, if you bring all of that in, will enable the digital transformation.
That's great. And Santha, so a couple of things you mentioned there I think are really interesting. First of all, we'll talk about data quality here in a bit too, but the fact that you were talking about the idea that you have to have your systems talking to each other, right? And digital transformation, how do you operate in COVID with everyone being home and remote and home offices? And there's also the idea that you have interaction, not just machine to machine, but interoperability between people, right? And collaboration. And so using your data in a way that you're building that data culture and having people be able to collaborate responsibly and using data ethically as well. I think it's a great point that you mentioned there too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I want to also add this because data culture in particular is something that I'm very passionate about. And I truly believe in the fact that the more people are aware of the value of data and the story of the data as it moves along the enterprise, the better they're able to engage with it. So for me, the concept of data literacy, people think of data literacy as seeing insights within your numbers. To me, data literacy means a lot more. It means knowing why a certain piece of data has come to you. What should you do with that data so your next neighbor can use it? What does it mean so that your leadership can use it? There's the story behind the data that makes someone literate about data. It is just not the numbers or anything of that kind, the story about the data. And therefore, how must you behave with it? How must you engage with it? Ethics, privacy, all of those too. But how do you generate it with quality as you build it and serve it up to your neighbor down the value chain? Those are very important things, and we in Sanofi are also very proud to be engaging with our stakeholders on educating them and making them more aware about the value of data and the story of data as it means to the business at large.
Thank you for all of your comments, all of your intelligence, and just helping all the insight that you've helped bring us today. So thank you, Santha, for joining me today. And please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews.